very specific thoughts about the movie and the part and what worked and didn't work for him. And I think I just nodded and smiled a lot and agreed with everything he said.
There are movies that entertain you, and then there are movies that quietly rewire the way you understand love, money, glamour, and the strange, desperate hunger for something real beneath all of it. Pretty Woman is one of those rare films. Released in March of 1990, it waltzed into theaters wearing sequins and a smile, carrying a Roy Orbison soundtrack and the kind of infectious energy that made you forget, at least for 2 hours, that the world outside was complicated and cold. Audiences didn't just like it. They fell completely, helplessly in love with it. $464 million at the global box office. Months in theaters. Repeat viewings. Vivian Ward became a cultural figure the way very few fictional characters ever do. She stepped off the screen and into the imagination of an entire generation. But here's the thing about fairy tales. The ones that last, the ones that genuinely endure across decades, are never as simple as they appear. Behind every sparkling frame of Pretty Woman was a story that the studio didn't want you to examine too closely. A story full of near disasters, hidden tensions, deleted darkness, impulsive decisions made on instinct, and moments of raw, unscripted humanity that somehow got captured on film and changed everything. The version of Pretty Woman that exists in the world today is not the film that anyone originally set out to make. It was shaped by arguments and accidents, by a director who trusted his gut when every executive in the room disagreed, and by a young actress who was so terrified that her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and who turned that terror into something the entire world recognized as magic. What follows are the forbidden scenes, the buried secrets, and the behind-the-camera chaos that the studio spent years hoping no one would ever piece together. Some of these stories are funny. Some are quietly heartbreaking. All of them will change the way you watch that film. Before there was a fairy tale, there was a reckoning. The original screenplay, written by J.F. Lawton, was not called Pretty Woman. It was called $3000, and that title tells you everything you need to know about its intentions. This was not a story about love, conquering class, or a woman discovering her worth through the eyes of a wealthy man. It was a blunt, uncomfortably honest examination of a transactional week in Los Angeles. A powerful corporate raider, a woman surviving on the margins, and $3,000 exchanged for time and company. There was no operatic balcony scene. There was no iconic red dress moment. There was no rescue. Vivian, in Lawton's original vision, was a woman shaped by genuine hardship. She struggled with addiction. She operated in a world that viewed her as disposable. Her story wasn't framed as charming or aspirational. It was framed as a portrait of invisibility, of what it looks like to exist in a city built on image when you have none of the currency that image requires. Edward, meanwhile, was not a quietly wounded soul waiting to be thawed by the right woman. He was calculating, self-interested, and ultimately incapable of transformation. The week ended precisely as it began, as a transaction. He paid her. She left. The city continued spinning without noticing either of them. That script was raw, challenging, and genuinely uncomfortable. It was also not what Disney had in mind when the studio acquired the property. The mandate that came down from the executives was clear and unambiguous. Transform it. Keep the electricity between the two leads. Keep the premise. Keep Los Angeles. But extract every trace of darkness and replace it with something that audiences could embrace without reservation. The rewrite that followed was not a minor polish. It was a fundamental reimagining of what the story was actually about. Vivian's addiction disappeared. Edward's coldness was reframed as emotional unavailability rather than predatory indifference. The ending was rebuilt from nothing into something deliberately, consciously cinematic. A modern Cinderella story with a twist that she rescues him right back. What is remarkable, looking back, is that the original screenplay's emotional core somehow survived the transformation. The tension between those two worlds, wealth and precarity, power and vulnerability, remained. Lawton's instinct that there was something electric in this particular collision of people turned out to be correct. even if the studio chose to explore that electricity through a completely different lens. The darkness was buried, but its ghost gave the film a weight that a purely uncomplicated romantic comedy would never have carried. Julia Roberts was 21 years old when she was cast in the original version of the project, and she was 21 years old when Disney's incoming executives looked at her and quietly began making other plans. The concern wasn't her talent. The concern was image. In the sanitized, glamorous romantic comedy that the studio now wanted to make, they were looking for a different kind of star, someone with an established name, a proven ability to carry glossy material, and a presence that read immediately as luminous rather than raw. Roberts, at that stage in her career, was associated with emotional intensity and unpolished authenticity. Those were precisely the qualities Disney wanted to move away from. The names that circulated internally during those anxious weeks included Meg Ryan, Daryl Hannah, and Michelle Pfeiffer. All accomplished, all commercially proven, all considerably safer bets by the studio's calculation. There were reportedly internal memos suggesting that Roberts was simply too intense for the tone they were chasing. For a period that lasted several weeks, she was effectively out of the film that would eventually make her one of the most famous actresses in the world. Director Gary Marshall refused to accept it. He had seen something in Roberts during the audition process that he could not articulate in the language of studio metrics, a quality that existed in the space between technique and instinct, a way of making complicated emotions feel utterly transparent and real. He fought for her with genuine conviction, telling executives plainly that removing her would remove the film's heartbeat. Eventually, he prevailed. Roberts was reinstated, but the episode left its mark. By the time filming began, she was carrying the psychological weight of knowing that the studio had already tried to replace her once. Every take carried the unspoken awareness that she was, in some sense, still auditioning. Crew members from the production have described watching her tremble before emotional scenes, her hands visibly unsteady, her breathing shallow in the minutes before the cameras rolled. She reportedly broke out in hives before her first close-up, and the makeup team had to work quickly between shots to manage the physical evidence of her anxiety. What appeared on screen as warmth and spontaneity was, in reality, a young woman performing at the absolute edge of her emotional resources and somehow, inexplicably, turning that pressure into grace. Richard Gere did not want to make Pretty Woman. That needs to be stated plainly because it is so difficult to imagine now. Gere in that role, in that film, is one of those perfect alignments that seems in retrospect to have been inevitable. But when the script first arrived, Gere dismissed it without significant deliberation. He had built his career on serious, morally complex material. A glossy romantic comedy about a man who purchases a woman's company struck him as precisely the kind of shallow, consequence-free entertainment he had no interest in lending his credibility to. He declined, then declined again. What changed was a meeting arranged by Gary Marshall in a New York hotel. Ostensibly casual, but clearly strategic. Gere arrived prepared to be polite and final. What he didn't anticipate was Julia Roberts. As the meeting reached its natural conclusion and Gere prepared to exit the project permanently, Roberts wrote something on a small piece of paper and slid it across the table to him. 2 words, "Please say yes." Gere looked at her, and whatever he had planned to say next apparently dissolved. He called Marshall that same day and agreed to do the film. What the public never fully appreciated was the degree to which Gere shaped his character from deeply personal material. The quiet piano melody that Edward plays in the hotel suite was not written by a composer or assigned by a music supervisor. Gere composed it himself the night before the scene was shot and played it live on camera. It was an entirely private creative act that the film absorbed without acknowledging its origin. He also carried a genuine philosophical unease about the story's relationship with wealth and power, a discomfort he has spoken about in later interviews, describing the film's fantasy as beautiful but also troubling in its implications. That tension, that slight shadow behind Edward's polished surface, was not a performance choice so much as an honest reflection of Gere's own ambivalence. It gave the character a dimension that the script alone had not quite managed to provide. The jewelry box scene is one of the most replayed moments in the film. Richard Gere presenting an extraordinary necklace, Julia Roberts leaning forward to look at it, and then the snap of the case, closing on her fingers, and the explosion of genuine, uncontrollable laughter that followed. Audiences have watched that moment thousands of times. What almost none of them know is that it was entirely unplanned, that it happened because a director whispered an instruction to one actor behind another actor's back, and that the jewelry involved was real. Not a prop, not a replica, but an authenticated Fred Jolier piece valued at over $250,000. The necklace had arrived on set under the supervision of two armed guards who remained stationed near it throughout the filming day. A representative from the jeweler was present at all times, positioned just outside the camera's frame, watching the handling of the piece with the focused attention of someone who understood precisely what was at stake. When Gere improvised the box-snapping moment, there was a fraction of a second in which everyone in the room understood that a miscalculation could result in a $250,000 piece of jewelry bouncing across a hotel suite floor. It didn't. The moment worked perfectly, and Gary Marshall called the take immediately, recognizing that what had just occurred on camera was irreplaceable. Robert's reaction, the gasp, the burst of laughter, the complete absence of performance, was the product of genuine surprise, and genuine surprise cannot be manufactured, only captured. The fact that it happened while someone in a suit was watching from off-camera with the focused intensity of a man protecting a small fortune is the kind of detail that makes Hollywood history feel simultaneously glamorous and completely absurd. The red gown that Julia Roberts wears to the opera in the film's most visually iconic sequence is one of the most recognizable costumes in Hollywood history. It represents a specific kind of transformation, the moment when Vivian Ward stops being invisible and becomes impossible to ignore. It is an image so perfectly constructed that it has embedded itself into the cultural vocabulary of what romantic aspiration looks like. And it almost didn't exist because the studio wanted the dress to be black. Costume designer Marilyn Van Straker presented her vision for the gown and was met with immediate resistance from executives who argued that black was more sophisticated, more appropriate, more aligned with the refined world that Vivian is entering for the first time. The argument had a certain logic to it. Black is safe. Black reads as elegant in nearly any context. Black would not distract. That was precisely Van Straker's objection. Vivian Ward at that moment in the film is not supposed to blend in. She's supposed to arrive. The designer argued passionately that the scene demanded a color that would make Roberts physically incandescent on screen, something that would work in dynamic relationship with the visual composition, with Gere's dark tuxedo, with the grandeur of the opera.